Welcome back, everybody. This is the Zooming In on Agribusiness series. This is interview number 2. And today we're talking to Laurie Powers, the CEO of Cantera Capital. And she's based right here in Regina. And Laurie, why don't you tell us a bit about Cantera and what Cantera does? I'm sure most people haven't heard of Cantera, and so this is a new name for them.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you for having me today. I appreciate the opportunity. Yes, Cantera Capital is the farmland manager for Canada Pension Plan. So we are the exclusive manager. We manage farmland, 175,000 acres, largely located in Saskatchewan. And we've been doing that since CPP purchased the portfolio back in 2014.
Right. And of course, that's a transaction I'm a little bit familiar with.
Yes.
Laurie and I used to work together back in the Assiniboia farmland days, and then Cantera came and bought the portfolio from Assiniboia, and then Laurie sort of took the reins and has been the CEO there since that takeover. And so we do have a little bit of history together, which was fun, and we enjoyed working together.
We certainly did.
So tell us about yourself. You know, this series is a focus on people and people in the agribusiness space. And I know you grew up in Saskatchewan, but tell us a little bit about your background, you know, where you grew up, and then where you went to school, and just sort of the early stages of your career, because I know you've done a number of different things here in the province.
Yeah, I certainly have. Certainly born and raised in Saskatchewan. I am a farm girl. Grew up on a farm just outside of Melville, and we had a family. My parents raised a family of 5 on a half section of land, so we certainly were humble farm beginnings. From there, my father ultimately retired in Melville, and I did high school in Melville and went to the University of Saskatchewan. I always knew, even in high school, that I wanted to be an accountant, sadly. But so I did my Bachelor of Commerce in Accounting from the U of S, articled with Deloitte. It was Deloitte, Haskins and Sells back in the day, out of Saskatoon. And from there, actually, I returned to Melville, had my first job post-CA with Sask Crop Insurance. And that was really my first, what I would call, accidental foray into agribusiness. From there, I was there for 4 years, ultimately the executive manager of finance there, and I went over to a private business in the ag sector, National Alfalfa, which was a producer-manufacturer of alfalfa products that were shipped overseas to Asia. And I was a CFO there for a number of years. Until I relocated back to Regina and worked with Information Services Corporation back in the days before it was a publicly traded company. So it was actually a bit of a startup company then, in that it was bringing together the land titles and geomatics from the government into a separate Crown corporation.
Which, of course, has a big connection to agriculture, even if it's not an agriculture business itself, right?
Absolutely. And so I was there for about 4 years. And from there, I moved over to Investment Saskatchewan, ultimately Victoria Park Capital. And that was basically an investment company here set up in the province that ended up being employee owned, and we managed a number of investments that the government had originally made, as well as did additional investments in the province. And what we were doing there was we were basically leveraging government money, but in order to invest $1 of government money, you had to invest $1.50 of private sector money. And when I look back at the investments that we managed and ultimately made, there was about, I believe, 7 different sectors, but the bulk of the investments had some sort of touch point with agriculture, which probably is not surprising when you look at the province and what drives the province. But even, you know, that was back in the, I guess that was the early 2000s. Let me think there. middle 2000s, 2004 to 2010 probably. There was a lot going on in the province as well, and a lot of that had to do with agriculture. So
Right.
some very,
Those were the boom times,
yeah,
especially at the tail end of that.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So that was, certainly that was very exciting, working with entrepreneurs throughout the province and helping assist them in whatever way we could by investing money alongside of them. So from there, I went over to Harvard Developments, so one of the Hill companies, and worked as the VP of Private Investments there until you and Doug came a-calling, and joined you when CPP purchased the portfolio of Assiniboia assets, and then moved over to manage that farmland portfolio. So while I certainly did not start out with a vision for agribusiness, by virtue of the fact that I, had my beginnings on a farm and chose very deliberately to stay in the province of Saskatchewan, was able to grow my career and ultimately end up as what I would call an accidental agribusiness entrepreneur, which was never really a goal of mine, but I'm very happy that it all turned out that way.
And I think that's a thing that happened. It's not uncommon that happens here in Saskatchewan, of course, with the economy being the economy that we have, with a lot of agriculture and services and manufacturing and so on that support the industry. A lot of people accidentally find their way into agribusiness. Certainly, I'm another good example of that, and probably even more accidental than you, because I grew up in Ontario and came here sort of accidentally and wasn't involved in agriculture at all in my history. And so I'm glad to hear, though, that you were able to take your accounting roots and find something more exciting than accounting to do with your accounting background and getting into the investment side of things.
Not that there's anything wrong with accounting. I have a lot of very good colleagues and friends who are in accounting, but
we all need accountants, and I just like to I like to have a little fun at their expense. So talk to me about Saskatchewan. And you've been involved in a number of businesses that have been either startups or early stage, and you've seen it, of course, from the investment side at Victoria Park Capital and so on. Are there any specific things you can identify that were advantages to doing that here in Saskatchewan compared to doing that somewhere else?
For me personally, or for the organization?
Both.
Both.
Maybe just start personally and then talk about organizationally.
Yeah, certainly I think there's a bit of an advantage when you're working in your home, whether it's city or province. I mean, we all know that it's a very small world. It doesn't take long to make contacts and be able to utilize those contacts in whatever way that you need to. It's a very welcoming community and province, country for that matter. And I feel that having the roots on the farm, as well as being able to utilize your contacts, who are always more than happy to help out. I think it's a very warm province in that people are willing to work together to the benefit of all, versus, in some, we'll call it industry, some places it's more about who's trying to get ahead of whom. I didn't find that at all in Saskatchewan. I can't think of anybody who I've ever picked up the phone or, to talk with or have a coffee with who's ever, not taken my call. And I found that to be very welcoming, as well as a very strong reason for staying and growing in the province. People are very generous of their time, and I feel that we're all looking to make the province a better place to be. Certainly having the agribusiness roots is an advantage, whether it's locally or worldwide. I have had the opportunity, largely with Canterra, to be able to go, beyond the borders of Canada to look at global opportunities, and having being grounded in Saskatchewan, which worldwide is well considered and known for its farming operations and its agri strength, certainly enabled me to be able to build those contacts and learn a lot from a lot of people. So I think that's important, not only for me personally, but as well as for businesses in Saskatchewan. I'll never forget when I did my ICD many years ago. I think I was in one of the first classes, and I did it in Calgary. That's the Institute of Corporate Directors designation. And I was the only one from Saskatchewan who went to Calgary to do those courses. And there was always the comment, did you turn the lights off when you left? You certainly don't get that anymore, and you certainly don't get that in agriculture. Saskatchewan is very highly thought of for many reasons, agriculture being one of them. So I think it's of advantage to individuals as well as companies alike.
I think you raise a great point there. That I found Saskatchewan to be extremely open to new people, and you're right. You can call anybody, and they'll call you back, and usually take time if you need it to talk to them about something or pick their brain. And I think that's great. That's good for everybody from students to business people to know about this community, that it's been very open and welcoming. And I know from working in other places that that's not always true in everywhere, that some places are a lot more stratified and harder to access people at senior levels, where here in Saskatchewan, and certainly here in Regina, where I've worked most of my working career now, it's remarkable how open people are and willing to share their time. And I think that's a real strength for this province, that we often we can easily forget about, as we think about dealing with whether it's government regulations or taxes or just business issues, that that there are people right around us who can be really helpful to us. You were going to did you find from a company perspective, are your thoughts sort of similar to from your personal experience? How do you maybe talk to us for a minute about dealing sort of more formally, business to business, or with regulators or government and those sorts of things, rather than personally? How has your experience been in Saskatchewan in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I would say it's not a whole lot different. I mean, I've had some governmental challenges. That's not much of a secret as it comes to farmland ownership regulation changes, and the impact of that on business. But having said that, I think the doors to businesses are generally open, whether you're dealing with the government or whether you're dealing business to business. Again, I find that the business leaders in Saskatchewan are very open and want to help each other succeed, and have really had no challenges at all. And I think that is a very consistent message and important for people to understand.
Yeah, for sure it is. Maybe take a minute and talk to us about the regulatory. You mentioned it briefly there. Just how do the farmland ownership rules affect your business? And at a bigger picture level, how do you see the impact of that play itself out in terms of the ag sector in the province? I know there are positives and negatives to the policy. I'm curious to see what you have seen as sort of an impact of that set of policies, which are pretty. I mean, they're not completely unique to Saskatchewan. Manitoba and Alberta have some restrictions, but I think they're a little bit more rigorous here. And so, just give us your perspective on that.
Yeah, well, certainly, and I'll give a little bit of history. So when Canada Pension Plan first came into the province, the ownership regulations were different, and they were allowed as a pension plan to acquire the Assiniboia portfolio, and the intent was to grow that portfolio both in Saskatchewan and more broadly across Canada. those farmland regulations for various reasons changed, and that restricted pension plans from being able to purchase in Canada. In Saskatchewan, which, as you've indicated, is quite consistent to Manitoba. Alberta is a little bit more open. Ontario's open, BC as well. So, it certainly has directly impacted our business. It was, we felt that there was an absolute need, and we saw an absolute need. And I believe there still is a need for outside investment in farmland in Saskatchewan. And the reason for that is I still get calls from farmers who are looking for someone who will purchase their farmland from them, or purchase a neighbor's farm that they're renting, and the neighbor is going to sell, and they have a need to rent it back, but they don't have the capacity to acquire that farm directly. So whether it's because of equity or financing or other constraints. So I still feel that, from what I see, there is a need for investment inside Saskatchewan that isn't, direct ownership by the operators. We can, debate all day how big that need is, but it certainly does exist. And we also see it on the rental side. When we're renting out farms, there's no lack of demand for the farmland. So people do need to rent farmland. And I don't see that going away as things become more and more expensive. And when you have farmers having to invest a significant amount of money in their operations, the capacity to buy farmland as it's appreciating on average it's been historically 7% per annum, can put property out of the reach of some farmers, at least at a point in time when that farmland becomes available. So I think, as farmers continue to age, we are going to see a continued need and pressure to address this issue. But that's, currently where it sits. I've, heard from some sources that it has pushed out other interests from Saskatchewan. The problem is you get into a bit of a liquidity issue, because there's just not as many buyers able to purchase that farmland if the area farmers can't buy it.
Right.
But right now, there's certainly a healthy farmland market. We're coming off a very strong crop year, so very pleased for our tenants in the farming community as a whole that after a few challenging years, there's been a great coming off a great year in Saskatchewan.
Right. And so, just for the sake of our audience, to be clear, your business model is to own but rent land to local farmers. You don't farm.
We do not
yourselves, right?
No, we do not. Never have and won't. Yeah, that's right. So.
Right. And is it how often would you say? Tell me if this isn't a fair question. How often would you say it happens that a farmer comes to you looking to? Well, you mentioned sometimes the neighbor's place is for sale, and they maybe have been renting it, or now they want to farm it, but they can't afford to buy it. But how often would it happen that a farmer comes to you and says, I'd like to sell you some land and then rent it back from you, and clean up my balance sheet and those sorts of things? Is that a frequent occurrence?
Just as frequent. I can tell you I've had 2 of those calls this week alone. Now we are in, that kind of cycle right now. It's January, people are revisiting their balance sheets. So I wouldn't say it's not every day I'm getting that type of call, but to say that I'm getting that call every couple of weeks, absolutely. Absolutely.
Right.
And I wouldn't say we're not the place of last resort, and we're not the only option they have. They're exploring options.
Sure. So. And, there are certainly a lot of individuals who have been investors in the farmland space. And of course, a lot of land is still owned by retired farmers and family members of farmers who maybe left the farm years ago, but have kept the land and rented it to their uncle or their cousin. And so that's what's the most recent data? Something like, I think I read somewhere that between 40 and 50% of the land in the province is rented. Would that fit with what you see?
That would be consistent with the types of numbers that I have heard, absolutely. Right. But at the end of the day, 98, 99% of that farmland isn't held by institutional type of investors. It's more local. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Let's change tack and talk about sort of students for a minute. So, you know, my role at the university is as executive in residence in agribusiness, and I talk to professors and teachers and students and the industry. And one of the messages that I've been giving to students is that the skills of the skills of business are the skills of agribusiness, and that, you know, they can do a business degree at the U of R and go into agribusiness and succeed, whether they're a finance major or marketing major, you know, all the different subsets of business education. What advice would you have to students who are business students, you know, in the Hill School or the Levene School, who, you know, maybe don't have a background, or regardless of their background, you know, some may have a background in agriculture and have a bit more of a natural knowledge or background knowledge of the industry, but, you know, students come from all over and may not have that same background. What thoughts would you have for them, advice as a seasoned business person who's done a few things here in the province, about them as they think ahead about their career, you know, and maybe graduation is looming and they're considering different options and different paths they can go down. Do you have any thoughts for them from a business person's perspective?
Absolutely. I would, you know, certainly say that you should be considering agribusiness just like you would any other industry. Whether it's me, my CFO, who as well certainly does not have, you know, a farming background, but has, you know, a CBV, has been very successful in the province, in whether it's Viterra with input capital here. I have surrounded myself also with people who do have that farming hands-on background. So, you know, when you're running a business, whether it's agribusiness or any other business, what's important is that the team as a whole is solid and covers all the gaps. So just because you do not have a farming background doesn't mean that you shouldn't be looking at agribusiness just as you would look at manufacturing or finance or any other industry. Particularly if you're considering staying in the province, and because it is such an important and integral part. And you see a lot of very exciting organizations developing and growing in this province. And when you look out 20 years, that's going to continue. Agriculture, the importance of it is becoming more and more obvious, both locally and worldwide, and is certainly, I think, has a lot of potential. We've come through, well, we're still in it, but as we've seen so far in the COVID environment, agriculture is a pretty great place to be right now, and I think we can see its resilience and its importance going forward. So I think what's important for business students to consider is that whether it's farming as an operator is big business. There, you know, right when you're operating a farm, right through to, you know, anything in the value add or service sector. And so it should be considered quite seriously, just alongside any of the other maybe historically more sexy industries. There's a lot of opportunity in agriculture. And I think it's important for students to also identify for themselves, what does success mean? Success is different for every individual. And I think as you mature and you work through your 20s, 30s, 40s and beyond, you know, your definition of success will change. And so it's important that you look inside yourself when you're going forward and not, you know, necessarily see, okay, you know, this seems to be where everybody's going or what people want to do. What do you want to do? What do you see yourself doing? You know, is it the corporate world? Is it small business? Is it entrepreneurialism? Take a look at all of those different factors and don't just go in the direction that, you know, the loud, maybe most obvious, I want to be the CEO of X. Right. There's a lot of very quietly successful people that you're seeing day in and day out. And it's important that you define that for yourself.
Yeah, good. Those are good thoughts. Thanks. As you let's take another one of those audiences that I talk to. There's an academic community in the business school at the UVar who do research in a variety of areas. Are there any areas that you can think of where that maybe you'd like to stimulate the academic community to think about as it relates to agribusiness in Saskatchewan? And maybe it's connected to your business, or maybe it's bigger picture, where the research community could be helpful and contribute to the discussion, whether it's policy or whether it's business strategy or whatever. What is there anything that if I was a professor looking for a new area to do research in, and agribusiness seemed interesting, what would be something that you would say could be a good use of my attention?
That's a very good question. Well, I guess the first thing that pops to mind really is ag tech, and selfishly it stems from a board that I sit on, which is the AVAC group based of Alberta, which is it's a venture capital company that invests across the continuum of entrepreneurship, but with a bit of a focus to support Canadian ag tech.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're seeing there is there's a lot of ground level opportunities where farmers, producers, even universities themselves are developing new technologies, but it's trying to bridge it from development and who's developing it to an actual business.
Right.
So I think what I would suggest there is a bit of a focus on research in terms of what would be the new, the type of technologies that could support agribusiness, but as well with a view to how do we ultimately commercialize this outside of the university. So looking at it from, it's not just research that you hand over, but who do we work with? How do we do it once we, have developed something and have developed,
right,
moving it to that commercialization stage to make it real and build out of there.
You're right, because it's one thing to invent a great new product. It's another whole thing to bring it to market and make it successful in the marketplace. That's a great point. And ag tech certainly seems to be a place that's getting a lot of attention these days. I'm involved on the board of an organization that's heavily involved in ag tech, actually in a variety of different ways, and there just seems to be a lot of capital flowing to that space and new things emerging new opportunities. So if for those who are interested in entrepreneurship and startups, there seems to be a lot going on in that space. And even here in Regina, I had a recent call with the team over at the Cultivator, which is the startup incubator that associated with Connexus Credit Union, and with Sean O'Connor from the Ag Private Equity Fund. And there seems to be a growing number of things just taking place right under our noses here too, which is exciting for people here in the city. And even one of our former employees, he has gone on to do a tech startup and gone through the Cultivator program. Now it's not an agribusiness, it's in a different sector, but they're building a business, and it's fun to stay in touch with him just to see how things are going and play a bit of a mentor role from time to time. And I think that's, as you talked about earlier, that's easy to access here because business people are willing to give their time and effort toward making others succeed here in our community.
Absolutely, because as we all know, the challenge with startups or even a developer of a strong product is that you might have the capacity and the ability to create a product. That doesn't make you necessarily the right person to be able to bridge that to commercialization. Right. So it's ensuring you have the right group of people together getting it to the next stage. Yeah. So yes, certainly very supportive of the cultivator in Saskatchewan.
If you can go back in time and give advice to, recent grad Laurie with her accounting degree, knowing everything you know now, what would you tell her?
That's a good question. I think I would, even if I went a little bit earlier to, university student Laurie, and then segueing into recent grad Laurie, it would be to be a little bit more well-rounded. I think, when I look back at my university and as I did my CA after, I was very single-minded and determined and focused, and it was all about the education, studying. When I look at students now, including my own son, I'm very proud to see that they have expanded. I think JDC West is fantastic. I see, the focus on volunteerism, athletics, whether it's, at a university level or at, just as an aside, right. Ensuring that you're, from a wellness perspective, having a little bit more balance. I think I would certainly encourage myself to consider all of those elements, because as somebody who hires people, on the flip side, at a certain point in time, whether you had a 90 or an 82 or a 78 doesn't become as important as the type of person you are. Right. And yes, you want dedicated, hard-working people. You want, to be the person who can be the go-to person. So I don't think there is any trade or substitute for hard work and genuineness, but I think it is important to, consider all aspects, and that is what employers look for. It's not just, what were your marks in school and what are you doing, down one narrow path. So yeah,
that's a good point. We recently, and I've hired a number of fresh grads from the university over the years, and probably the thing I looked at least was their marks, and the more we were trying to figure out, how well would this person fit, mm-hmm. and were they able to pick up new skills along the way? Because attitude, it's hard to train attitude. You can train skills. Yes. But you look for people with the right attitude, and if they have a good attitude and they can learn, usually they can do just fine, and as long as they have a good work ethic to go with it. So
absolutely.
Any other thoughts as we wrap up here?
I would probably just conclude by thanking you for the opportunity to speak to your audience. And secondly, just encourage the students as well as the School of Business to certainly continue to embrace agribusiness as a very important area, an important industry that should be considered by students as they're advancing into their careers, and secondly, by a business school as an area, whether it's with bringing you on, whether it's bringing in speakers or specific classes. I think it's very important that we look within our province as well as beyond our province and consider the importance of agribusiness in it.
Well, terrific. Thanks for taking the time today, Laurie. We appreciate your participation in the series. I know I do, and I know you told me before you didn't really like talking about yourself, but your input and your experience are valuable to others out there, and so I appreciate you taking the time and sharing that with us, just like others have as well throughout this series. That concludes interview number 2 of our Zooming In on Agribusiness series, and I want to thank Laurie for participating today. Stay tuned for more of these to come, and feel free to contact me at the email address at the end of the video if you have any questions or want to connect with anybody. Thanks for watching.